Welcome to the Coaching Edge podcast with your co-hosts, Dr. Steve Jeffs and Erwin de Grave. Each episode, we bring you expert guests and transformative coaching insights. Let's dive in.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to your new episodes of the Coaching Edge podcast with your co-host, Dr. Steve Jeffs and myself, Erwin de Grave. And today we have the pleasure to talk to Laura Berman Fortgang. Hello, Laura. How are you doing?
Hello, doing well. Hello from New York City.
Ooh, nice. So, Laura, we could try to introduce yourself, but you know yourself much better than we do. So, who is Laura? How did she came in coaching, and what does she do specifically in coaching nowadays?
Okay. How I came to coaching was I was a client first. I had been an actor, which was my dream, and I got disillusioned with the lifestyle and I didn't know what else I would do with my life. And I called an old acting mentor and he had become a coach and I'd never heard of such a thing. So I was a client for 2 years. And then I looked at him, I said, I want to do what you do. So I was one of the first people trained by Coach U in the United States, which I was student number 16. And then I was one of the first founding members of the International Coaching Federation and served on the board there. And I've had an incredible journey. I've gotten to write 5 books. I have a TEDx talk with over 2 million views. One of my friends has helped me count my coaching hours. It's probably up to 25,000, if not more. And did I miss anything? And I round out my life with a family of 5 and 3 pets. And I, for fun, crochet and refinish furniture. Did I answer all the questions? I think I got them all right.
Well, what are you doing nowadays in coaching?
That's the piece of it. So nowadays I have shifted I still have executive coaching clients that I do on my own, but I have a group program for coaches called the A-List Coach, and I help them learn the business side of the business. They spend a lot of time and money learning how to coach, how to be a coach, and then have the shocking entry into the world of entrepreneurship, and most coaches are not ready for that. And the ICF has a statistic that 82% of coaches fail within 2 years of starting a business. And I heard that and just pivoted my whole business. I was like, I'm an elder in the community now. This is unacceptable. I have to do something about this. And that's what I've been doing.
What's the main thing that since you make that shift for the last 5 years, what have you seen the main point or thing that you see that is common for most coaches, certainly about the business side?
They don't like to sell. You know, the whole idea of marketing and selling, which are distinct, constantly having to be looking for clients or doing activities that grow your pipeline is disillusioning to a lot of coaches, and also having to have those sales conversations where they just want to coach and be helpful and give so much of what they know, and then people end up not hiring them. So there's a whole finesse to having a discovery call too. So that's, and then let's add the third piece, which is overwhelming for a lot of people, is being cook, chief, and bottle washer. Like, you've got to do everything when you start out in a business if you don't have a big budget to hire help. So it's a cacophony of activity.
And, was it a number 16 student with Coach Hugh, as you said, sort of here from the beginning of the profession in many ways? What remains exciting for you about this profession of coaching?
What remains exciting is that you can create coaching in your own, it can be a self-expression. What I mean by that is that you can run your business how you want. You can market your business as you want. Like, for example, I'm working with somebody who's a retiree and she wanted a coach. And then she was very disillusioned with, I don't want to do all this business stuff. I don't even need to make money. And she was ready to quit. And instead, we found that she loves to help people write their memoirs. So she created a coaching practice, not as a writing coach, but using memoir as a tool and a method to access what people want to do. So you really can take something you're interested in and form a coaching practice out of it. And I think that that's what keeps it exciting. Like, I know for myself, like I reinvent every 4 years or so. I've been doing this over 3 decades, and you've got to keep it fresh. So what's going to keep it fresh for you is changing who you work with, or maybe a style we work with, or you learn a new tool. So there's always something to learn, and it keeps you humble. Like every time you think, oh, I've been doing this forever, I have 25,000 hours, I know what I'm doing, then you get a scenario that you've never done before. So keeping that humility and being open-minded is really important, and it keeps it fresh.
There's a big difference between, if you look at the coach, because you just gave that example of the retiree who retired person, he said, I don't have to do this for the money, than compare for someone who is coaching and say, I need to make money because the focus is different, and the need is completely different, and could also be sometimes like daunting.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I have people who hopped out of a corporate job and need to make a solid 6 figures or several 6 figures, and it's like, well, you really have to hustle as a coach to make that happen. There's one thing to rely on your network and those first few people through referrals, but that's not enough. And I happen to find, and this is how I grew my business, and this has stayed consistent for as long as I've been doing it. I actually find that going out and speaking is the #1 way to bring a pipeline of clients into your business, because if you're in front of a room of 100 people, someone's already said yes to you and hired you to be the speaker. So you have built-in credibility, built-in authority. They've said yes to be in that seat. They chose your session at the conference, and there's a lot of yeses going on. So those are the perfect people to then be talking to you about working with you. And they'll there's ways to be on purpose about that. You don't just have to hope that people come up to you after the speech to hire you. But I just find speaking to be a way to have a consistent pipeline of prospects. And most, and that's not everybody's cup of tea, to get up in front of a room, but I do find it to be the fastest path to making money as a coach, unless you have like a tremendous network, right?
And how do you get those? Because people say, yeah, speaking, great, I love to speak, I love to, but how do I get those speaking gigs? And certainly when I start off, and you're already like more than 30 years in coaching, you have a name and written, but if someone who starts off and say, listen, I'm new as a coach, how do I get those speaking gigs, and what should I do?
Well, really you start out speaking for free, right? So within a mile radius of where you live, there are places you can speak, whether it be a community center or a religious organization, the Chamber of Commerce. There's places for you to get out there. And one thing I find for certain is speaking begets speaking, right? So once you're up in front of an audience, it's like, oh, we should have them at our conference. And then you get your first paid speaking gig, so that it can be pretty organic is what I'm trying to say. But also when I work with coaches, I have them put an alert on their Google for RFPs for speakers or call for speakers, and every day you'll get opportunities to speak. Yes, you have to compete with some more seasoned people, but it grows, it happens.
It catches my attention that you said, within a mile, like that's a real 3-dimensional view on creating opportunities. And everyone I see, they're looking at online this, online that, global here, clients everywhere. What role does, in-person 3-dimensional interactions play in today's world of coaching and business?
I think that there you can definitely make an impact online, no doubt, but I feel that as we move into this age of AI, people still crave connectivity with humans, and putting them in a room and inspiring them in some way, or making them think, or having them talk to each other, like people still really value and crave connection. So I find that as much as you can do in person is still really effective.
I would agree with that. There's something. The first thing that crossed my mind as you shared that is, when we're in person, we can often influence the space a whole lot more than we can online. You can do a presentation like we are on Zoom, and you can be from all around the world. People have got multiple screens, they've got their phones up, their cameras down, they're listening to something else. People sign up to get the recording so they can listen in double speed while they're doing something else. This whole catching attention thing to me shows up differently, and we can influence a lot more in person. I think that is an underutilized opportunity, but also skill these days.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, people are hyper distracted and they, multitasking. And when you have them in a room and you make them turn off their phones, um, you've got their attention. You've got their attention. And, a trend that I've seen in speaking over the years is it used to be okay to be a talking head, but now they're always like, we need to engage the audience. It needs to be very interactive, so that's a change in people's attention span. Is like you can't just talk at people. You have to create an experience for them and get them talking to each other, or talking back at you and keeping them engaged. And that's been an interesting evolution of people's attention span and how you have to get that attention that you're talking about.
Other than the obvious, how has that influenced how you show up in speaking engagements?
I've really had to think about, it's not about, that it's not about the information as much as them having like I said, an experience. Like they have to viscerally experience it to get it, right? The talking head doesn't work, slides full of text doesn't work. It has to be, almost have to think like a multimedia presentation, like what are all the ways that I can reach every learner sitting in my audience, right? Do they learn by listening? Do they learn by seeing stuff? Do they learn experientially? So for me as a speaker, it's a challenge I welcome. Like it hasn't been a negative thing. It's just, you really have to think strategically on how to touch all the different kinds of learners and how to engage them more. And story certainly is very engaging. And, honing those stories, collecting those stories and making it relevant to your audience has been, the ongoing journey of being a speaker / coach. I mean, where the coaching piece comes into it is that's the lens that you look at the world through as a coach, right? So you're going to be a different kind of speaker, even on leadership or a topic that everybody does. Like you just have a unique point of view because you sit in that sidecar, right? That your client's in the motorcycle and you're in the sidecar and you have this view, and this just the take of things, like when I do a Q&A when I'm speaking, I rarely give answers. I'm like, can I ask you a question? Right? So you're kind of coaching in front of the room.
Depends also a little bit on the type of speaking gigs that are, because if you like on a panel, it's a little bit more difficult to really
Definitely
do
more
that
difficult.
experiences and that you tell. So I think, and certainly for the audience to look at, is you have different types of speaking. And in the beginning, I think it's more important that they see you on the stage, even if it's a panel, because automatically when you're on the stage, you're like perceived as an expert.
Right. Authority building, credibility building. Absolutely.
Exactly.
So that's a good place to start. Like if you don't have an opportunity to have your own spotlight, being on a panel gets you started. And, and then being able to say, well, I just participated in this conference, right? So you've got a credit to your name.
Exactly.
So for many coaches listening, they've just invested time, effort, and energy in learning coaching, and now we're saying, okay, there's this whole skill set of speaking. What other skills do we as coaches need to learn to be able to, flourish professionally in coaching?
Well, talking about, attention span and you prioritizing as a coach with your own business, one man show, or maybe you have an assistant, really understanding, how to carry all these pieces without losing them all. I mean, I think that's a skill in itself. And I often joke that, as an actress, I waited on tables as a server for a long time. And I feel like everybody should wait on tables to learn how to be an incredible multitasker, because, you know, you don't go into the kitchen and bring out one thing. You go into the kitchen and go, okay, table 2 needs this, table 4 needs that, table 6 needs that. Like, you're constantly thinking, like, how do I maximize my time? And I definitely brought that to my business, and it's hard to teach, but I think that's one of the biggest obstacles, is maximizing your time, because people will be like, oh, you know, I'm afraid to get on the phone. I don't want to do sales calls. So I'll just clean my desk, or I'll organize my files, or, you know, I'll deal with my database, because it's a, you know, low hanging fruit as to a task, and it helps you avoid the task that you should be doing. Now, as a coach, in their own practice, you really only have 2 jobs: coach people and have sales calls. You know, find a way to build your pipeline and get people on the phone with you. As soon as possible, you need to delegate everything else. And, you know, people on a shoestring budget starting out will say, you know, well, I don't have the money to hire anybody. And it's like, you can't afford not to have help in your business, because you will do those mundane tasks in order to avoid the thing that only you can do, right? So you have to really ask, like, what's my skill set? The coaching. And what's my skill set? I'm the rainmaker. You know, I have to bring in the business. That's your job. And then you've got to manage, you know, the rest of it. But as soon as possible, have somebody help you. And, you know, we have lots of I mean, my first assistant many years ago was a student. You know, just anybody who could take a few things off my plate. And now, you know, we have virtual assistants. We have people from the Philippines who it's very affordable to us, and they're making a great wage for them. And so, you know, help in your business so that you're doing the tasks that you're really your sweet spot, that you're good at, is just so important. And I think it's one of the biggest obstacles for people, because, like I said, you need to learn how to keep all the balls in the air, but you don't have to do it all yourself.
And what do you think about outsourcing yourself to get people to have to come to the chemistry call? Because I know people that say, hey, yeah, well, I don't like sales. Would it be a good idea to find a sales executive who can, or a salesperson that can get people at the door?
I will say it depends. You know, that's something that I've avoided, because, you know, how do you feel when someone slips into your LinkedIn DMs? Like, thanks for connecting me. Hey, I have something to sell you, right? Like, no, thank you. So that tends to be the tactic that most of those companies will do, is, you know, sliding into people's direct messages, you know, cold calling. Does it work in some instances? It does. I mean, you know, there's people companies out there who guarantee you, like, we will get you 30 calls a month. You know, great. You know, so because I haven't used it myself, I can't really say, you know, yes or no, other than it's worth a try. But ultimately, you're the one who's going to have the conversation.
Of course.
Yeah, I know many entrepreneurs who run by the theory of learn how to do it before we delegate. And so they spend a lot of time working to learn the skills, if for nothing else, that they can then manage the people that are doing it. Because if you've got no idea what good sales looks like, how do you manage outsourcing sales to, you know, to someone else? Are they using sales to get to you and it's not going to deliver results? Are they delivering, as you said, a sales process that's congruent with the coaching journey and the values that we're expressing? I mean, that's one of the challenges that I see, is the people buy one thing and then they show up and suddenly we're in front of them and this isn't what they were expecting, and that dissonance then, you know, disrupts everything.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that, you know, it depends on the size of what you're doing. You know, they're like, if we were to take the Anthony Robbins organization, right? He doesn't get on the phone with all the people who buy his tapes, right? He has a whole sales arm. You know, that's a whole different story. But when you're talking like, you know, a boutique shop, you work in it, I mean, people want to talk to you. You know, they they are choosing you as their coach because there's a chemistry in there. That's why they're called a chemistry call, right? So I don't know if it's delegatable. I mean, it's the part that's delegatable is getting someone to bring in the prospects, right?
Yeah.
And then you're still going to have.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it can be done. It can be done. Like I, now that I think of it, I think I did give this a try, but it was somebody going into people's direct messages, and it just felt swarmy. It just didn't feel. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. So anyway, that's just my opinion.
It needs to be someone who at least knows you, who is who knows what you're doing, understands this, and but is very good in selling. It's not a coach, but it's very good at opening the door and say, hey, you should have a chemistry call, and they can make the because what happens with most coaches, most coaches don't have the problem to make that initial connection, but it's that selling itself to say, well, it's that price and what's going on. So that if you can take this away and say, hey, you have a chemistry with the person and what you feel, that could help them to say, I don't have to focus on something that's really, really, really I don't like. Well, I don't mind doing it for myself, but people think about that. They say, I don't like that, to reach out.
Right. Prospecting, we'll call it, like going out and finding the people. Yeah. I mean, it's delegatable. It's worth a try. In my group program, I did bring on a salesperson in the last year, and, but they really know coaching. Like they could be a coach themselves. Like they really know it. And that makes a humongous difference. And they're not out prospecting. I bring all the people in, I'm doing an event, and I'm not having all the conversations to close these people. This person is, and that's been a blessing. But
so you're talking really about a closer.
Exactly.
Which is different than prospecting. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. But I think prospecting is the hardest part for coaches, is where the lead's going to come from. How do I find them? How do I get them to talk to me? And there's several strategies for that. I mean, I do know, I have a client right now, a coach who has 6,000 people in their LinkedIn profile, and he's trying to build relationships with a lot of them, like not going in there and selling, just like really, getting on the phone and finding out what they do. And, it's a slower route, but it builds a network, and it's starting to pay off for him, so it's just a lot of work, it just
time
is.
And it takes time.
It takes time. When people say, like, I don't know what to do in my business, I just sit there all day, like staring at the screen, that's the time that you're, networking on LinkedIn, or you're looking for speaking opportunities, or you're, calling ex-clients and getting reconnected with them. All the strategies to bring in new business.
How important are referrals? You just mentioned that, but how important do you believe that referrals are for coaches?
I mean, it's great to have word of mouth. There's no doubt. Or having repeat business from people who worked with you and they bring in somebody, referrals, word of mouth, it makes selling much easier. But I think that, depending on how many people you've worked with, referrals run dry. I mean, how many times can you go back to the same person and be like, hey, do you know anybody else who might be interested in coaching? Right. So you've got to keep the new faces coming in.
One of the things that I hear is, you spoke about marketing and sales, and actually there's a whole lot of different aspects all the way along all of this. And one of the things that, as accidental entrepreneurs, as new coaches, we forget to do is pay attention to any of those, let alone all of the different steps to be intentional about, well, if I'm not going to do it, who is? How's it going to get done if it's not going to be me? And if there's no one to get it done, it has to be me. So actually what needs to get done so that I can keep moving forwards? I love what you said before, different words, but a coach has got two roles: one, to coach people, and two, to find people to coach.
Right, exactly. That's your job. That's your job.
One thing I see with coaches is they can be free and give themselves a lot of permission and really show up with aliveness when it's client directed. Yo, what's your topic? What would you love to take out of our session today? But as soon as the coach has to have an agenda or an expectation of outcome or drive towards any particular something, they kind of freeze up. Is this something that you've seen, and what tips do you have in that space?
It's like you freeze up because something's been triggered in you, right? So you need to look at, what triggered you, where the fear come from, or what are you shy about? The part of what people pay us for is to tell the truth, right, as we see it or as we understand it in relation to the person we're working with. So if you're holding back, you're withholding something that could be really valuable to that person. I really believe that when you're working with a client, you're a conduit for them. We're not all in touch with our psychic abilities, but I mean that you're measuring their energy, you're listening for pauses, you're listening for their heart rate going up even, so you really are it's our responsibility to share what occurs to us. So when you hold back or you get shy, or even if it's like a sales conversation, a person has an objection and you're like, oh, okay, bye. Right. So we have to be with that discomfort. And I think that's the skill to build, is how can you be with the discomfort, right? And not get scared by it, whether it's, a growth opportunity for your client or a growth opportunity for you, or both at the same time. How do you not shy away from those uncomfortable moments? And even, saying it as it is, oh, well, this is making me really uncomfortable. I'm not sure if that's about me or about you. Like, I say, call it on the carpet, call out what is really happening, whether you think it's appropriate or not.
To be coach-like in many ways. One thing I love about what you just said was, this is a skill we need to develop. And most of us haven't had any training in these skills. We haven't had any practice. We haven't had any feedback. We haven't had any coaching. And, I like to remind myself when I can, but certainly the people I work with, that, well, look, just because it's difficult doesn't mean that it's not authentic. Just because it feels weird doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means that it's, new. And so what needs to happen so you can find your way of, delivering finding those skills and getting that practice. I think that's a really great reminder.
Well, discomfort equals growth. So you got to remember, when you're uncomfortable, it's a growth opportunity.
No, that's only about the clients, not about us. No way. We're human too.
Well, that's the beauty of coaching versus therapy. In therapy, the therapist is not supposed to be there at all. They're just, they don't share their personal stuff. They don't tell stories. They're there for you. But in coaching, it really is a two-way street. I mean, I think that's part of why people like it better. Not that you're dumping your stuff onto your clients, but you're growing too. You're growing too.
It's the essence of partnership in many ways.
Yes. So you're better together. That's the lesson, I guess.
And the most thing about the comfort is that certainly when you look about sales or you need to push something through, the know you already have. So actually, the only thing that you can win is a yes.
Yeah.
Because if you think about, oh, what if they say no? Well, before you started the conversation, the no was already there, because should your only thing is to say, well, if I say something, I feel uncomfortable, but hey, what would it mean? And that's a mindset.
It's a mindset, and it's also knowing what questions to ask, because whether it's a coaching conversation or a sales conversation, you're coaching them, right? So when I teach about overcoming objections, I say an objection is not a no, an objection is an invitation to ask more questions.
Mm.
And if you ask the right questions, you're never convincing or selling anybody at all. You're helping them access their own blocks to what they say they want.
Well, that's a very nice point of view. It's like just asking questions to understand them more, where they're coming from.
Exactly. So, even if it's about, well, I don't have the money, well, what are your options here? Right. So get them to talk more about that. Just, being question based all the way through. And I think that helps a lot of coaches too, that don't like selling or, get scared of that part, is it's just a coaching conversation. But it's not necessarily a coaching conversation of giving them free coaching and solving their problems, but it's a coaching conversation about, what's keeping them from investing in themselves, or what's keeping them from doing the work at hand for the thing that they say that they want.
Coaching session with that very specific topic to, get clear on the next steps, take the investment energetically, motivationally, financially, to help them progress towards where they want to get to. It's very narrow topic, but absolutely coaching. Interesting.
So you've been so many years in coaching. What have you seen the evolution in coaching until now?
Well, I mean, when I started, people asked me, what are you, a football coach? What team, what sport, what are you talking about? Like they did, there was so much education to be done. Mm-hmm. And now, people are like, oh, I met 50 of you this week. Everybody's a coach. So that's been an interesting dynamic. Some people say, oh, Laura, you had it easy. There weren't as many coaches back then. Well, we had to explain what it was, and it was a foreign thing. And nowadays people have to overcome, how do you stand out in such a crowded field? So that's the biggest thing. Also, the market is more savvy. People know, especially in the corporate arena, they're like, are you an MCC? They want to know that you have a credential. The public still doesn't really care about credentials, in my view of who I talk to, but corporately they do. So that's changed. I mean, I've been a master credential coach. That's what MCC stands for anyone who doesn't know. Since 1993, right? So that's what's changed. That's changed. People are, a lot of the marketplace is way more savvy, and they're looking for people who can really deliver. I don't think there's as much room for people who aren't good at this. In the beginning, no one had anything to compare it to. And now people can talk to 5 coaches and choose their best coach, so I think, you really have to be skilled. And how do you get skilled? You got to coach. The founder of Coach U was Thomas Leonard, who's since deceased, but he said to me once, when you've coached 100 people, you'll know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I used to keep little tick marks by the phone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I remember the 100th person. I remember it clearly. Like, I coached this guy in a discovery call. I coached too well, because he goes like, oh, I don't need to hire you. You just solved my problem. But I went to my little marks on the wall on my paper, and I was like, oh, that was the 100th person. I know what I'm doing.
Woo! Oh, that's fantastic. And what's emerging? Like, what's next for coaching from your perspective?
I mean, I think we have to deal with that AI is, there are companies offering AI coaches, bots, and they're not giving that to their highest level executives, but it's making coaching accessible at different levels. I mean, in a way, it's a good thing that it'll be more accessible to people further down the the employee line, but at the same time, that's hard for coaches. Also, there's, Better Up and some of the other groups, Ezra, who else? I don't know. There's quite a few groups that hire coaches and put it out at a very low price point out there. And coaches are, making $50 to $80 an hour, where they could make a heck of a lot more on their own. But that's an option for people who don't want to prospect and don't want to have to go find their own clients. But it's become commoditized. That's the challenge I'm trying to articulate, is that it has become commoditized. So there's going to be different stratus of what coaching is and how it's available, and what does that mean to the individual coach. I think that's still working itself out, how effective it's going to be to have an AI bot coach you. They're pretty good. I've tried them. It's amazing, but they're not highly intuitive, and they're not the human connection. So hopefully we still have some longevity.
Would that also mean that those two things, the commodity and the AI, will also filter through those coaches that really these are coaches, and those that call themselves coaches but are really not coaches, to fall through the net?
Yeah, I think that it'll help filter. They're also, those companies are also gotten sophisticated as to, what's your credential as a coach, and we want to make sure we have good coaches. So, anyone can hang up a shingle, but it's not as easy anymore to hang up a shingle and just expect that you're going to have a practice. There's more hoops to jump through, and that's not to discourage anybody. I mean, it's just excellence is going to be important.
Yeah, I see this as part of the professionalization of the profession of coaching. We've got standards, we've got to hold by it, we've got to develop as coaches and build our craft, gain that experience, get those check marks. But also, as we said earlier, to build the infrastructure around us that allows us as coaches to focus on where we need to, the coaching of the clients, the getting of the new clients. And of course, to be able to continue to partner with the clients where they're at with what they need and help them move towards what's important for them. Both in those things that they know they want, but also those other things they don't really know that they wanted until after they've experienced them in coaching conversations.
It's true. And also, I mean, the world's changing for the people we coach too, and they will continue to need coaching. They will continue to need to adapt and evolve. And it doesn't necessarily come up as a therapy issue, right? It's a coaching thing. So I think we still have some job security.
It's interesting. The first time that you really that someone talks about, we've been always talking, hey, what's the future of coaching and what's the industry going? And now you touch something, hey, what does that mean for the clients? All
Right.
those changes that are happening, because that means we as coaches, we need to adapt to the market, because this is evolving so quickly, and the clients or potential clients or the coachees, for them it's also becoming quite confusing, and maybe some more clarity could help. Then as a coach you can give that clarity and offer that clarity.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been at the core of, when I look at the decades that I've been coaching, like, it's the things that people want clarity on have changed. Like, I can point to the beginning of my career as like helping people get promotions and get ahead. Then in the 1990s, it was all about work-life balance. The economy was good. The world was at peace for a moment, and people they could write their own ticket. Right. Then we have the global collapse of the economy in the 2008 market crash. People had a different thing that they needed to evolve to, and now this crazy world that we're living in now. So, we help people manage all the changes around them, and it's changed. What they want has changed, but ultimately as humans, people just, they want to be satisfied in their work. They want to have time to spend on things that matter to them and be with their family. I mean, none of that has really changed, but how they get there has evolved.
We're still human after all, at least for the short term.
Yes, at least for now. You can get your food delivered by a robot, but we're still humans.
Yeah, there's something powerful in there. I'm excited by the ongoing conversations as we actually discover more about what it means to be human and where and how we can best leverage humanity within the systems and automations that are emerging. Laura, this has been fantastic. For those that have questions and would love to connect or learn more about you, your worldview, or what you're doing, in the world, how can people connect with you?
If you can spell Fortgang, Fortgang, you can find me. So my website is laurabermanfortgang.com. If you look up Laura Berman, you're going to get Dr. Laura Berman, the sex doctor. So don't do that. Google Fortgang. There are not many of us, but if you can remember the whole name, it's laurabermanfortgang.com.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for this interesting conversation we had about many different topics. So it was really interesting and exciting. And everybody else, thank you for listening in. And until the next episode, take care. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to The Coaching Edge. Until next time, keep coaching and keep growing.